The first call came in at 3:17 a.m., not from a frantic relative or a concerned neighbor, but from an automated security system at Meadowbrook Farm. A silent alarm. This single detail, quiet and unassuming, marks the true beginning of one of the most perplexing cases we've ever examined. Because what it failed to report was the horror already unfolding, a horror that would leave a family shattered and a community grasping for answers. We're opening the case file on Meadowbrook, and the first piece of evidence is this silent early morning notification. Let me walk you through what happened. According to the official incident report, a patrol unit was dispatched to the remote farm property in rural Oakhaven County, precisely at 3:19 a.m. Standard procedure for a security alert. No sirens, no urgency. The dispatcher noted a routine system malfunction, a common occurrence with older farm security setups. That's what the records show. But here's where it gets strange. The system log, later obtained through a FOIA request, reveals something different. The initial trigger for the alarm was not a general system error. It was a specific motion detection in the main barn, a large, isolated structure approximately 200 yards from the farmhouse. This distinction matters because the patrol officers were not informed of this specific detail. They were sent to a generic security alert for the address, not a targeted breach warning. The patrol car, Unit 7B, arrived at 3:34 a.m. Officers Davidson and Miller noted nothing outwardly suspicious. No forced entry visible on the main house, no strange vehicles. The property appeared quiet. The official report states they conducted a perimeter check, then attempted to contact the residents by doorbell and phone. Both attempts, according to their log, went unanswered. What doesn't add up is the timing. According to witness statements taken later in the morning, the family at Meadowbrook Farm, the Millers, were known early risers. By 3:30 a.m., patriarch Thomas Miller often already had the lights on in the kitchen, preparing for his day. So why, on this particular morning, would there be no response? The evidence suggests a terrifying possibility that the silent alarm wasn't just a malfunction, but a cover for something far more sinister. Officer Davidson, in his initial handwritten notes, mentions a detail overlooked in the typed incident report: a faint, almost imperceptible smell of wood smoke in the air. This was dismissed as residual from local fireplaces, common in late autumn. But Meadowbrook Farm used an electric heating system. That detail matters, because it points to an anomaly that was filed away, then forgotten. A family's last day. The phone call to Meadowbrook had set the official story in motion, but its origin was far from clear. What isn't in dispute, however, is the state the responding officers found the farm in, a scene of unimaginable violence. This is where the official timeline begins to take shape, or at least where it attempts to. Let's reconstruct Sarah Miller's final hours minute by painstaking minute. She was last seen alive by her sister Emily at their family's weekly Sunday dinner. According to Emily's statement, Sarah seemed distracted, on edge. A detail that at the time seemed insignificant, a passing observation. But in hindsight, it stands out. Sunday, October 27th. The last normal day. Sarah spent the afternoon at her parents' home, just outside Meadowbrook, a familiar routine. Records show she made a short phone call to her husband, David, at 4:17 p.m., confirming she was on her way home. The content of that call, as later recounted by David, was brief, mundane, a quick check-in. It was a call that, in all likelihood, masked the undercurrent of unease Emily had observed. What happened between that call and the eventual discovery of the scene? This is where the story darkens. David Miller stated he arrived home from work around 5:30 p.m. He found the house sitter, a young local woman named Chloe, preparing to leave. Chloe confirmed Sarah had not yet returned. This means David was alone on the property for at least an hour before Sarah's car pulled into the driveway at approximately 6:45 p.m., a detail that matters. It places David at Meadowbrook unobserved for a crucial window of time. What was he doing during that hour? His statement offers generalities: tidying up, preparing dinner. Yet the forensic findings would later challenge the simplicity of that account. Sarah's arrival at 6:45 p.m. marks a critical juncture. The official report states that a neighbor, Mr. Henderson, heard what he described as a loud argument emanating from the Millers' property shortly after 7 p.m. But his initial police statement mentions voices agitated. Later, weeks later, under intense questioning, he shifted to an argument. This isn't a small inconsistency. Did he genuinely recall new information, or was something else at play? The report pushes past this discrepancy, yet it stands out to us. The timeline breaks here. Something doesn't fit. Let's examine why. The missing weapon. The official report stated a .38 caliber revolver was the murder weapon, a critical detail until you consider the lack of recovery. No firearm was ever found at Meadowbrook Farm or anywhere in the surrounding area. This immediately raises a red flag. For a crime this violent, with 4 victims, the primary weapon simply vanished, a ghost in the evidence log. The timeline of the discovery, laid out in the initial police notes, shows deputies arrived at 7:14 a.m. The scene was secured, and the gruesome reality of what happened began to unfold. Yet, the initial sweep, meticulous as it was, yielded nothing. Not a shell casing, not a spent bullet, despite the sheer brutality of the attack. What does this absence tell us? It suggests a deliberate effort. Someone took the time to meticulously clean the scene of this crucial piece of evidence. That detail matters. Because without the weapon, ballistics become a hypothesis rather than a fact. We're left then with only the wounds themselves, the entry and exit points, the calibers estimated by forensic pathologists. Their findings indicated multiple shots, consistent with a revolver which, unlike a semi-automatic, does not eject casings. But even with that, the lack of the physical gun leaves too many pathways unexplored. This wasn't merely an oversight, it was a calculated removal. Was it the killer cleaning up their tracks? Or was it someone else, arriving after the fact, with their own agenda? The initial witness statements collected in the hours following the discovery focused heavily on the chaotic scene, the victims, the overturned furniture, the signs of a struggle. But not one person mentioned seeing anything unusual, anything resembling a weapon, either in the hands of a fleeing suspect or discarded nearby. Not the first deputies on scene, not the first neighbors who approached, nothing. This absence, this void where the most crucial piece of evidence should have been, opens up a critical question. What does the missing weapon, and the meticulousness of its absence, really conceal? Alibis under scrutiny. The previous chapter closed with the missing weapon, a detail that profoundly impacts the case. Now, we must scrutinize the alibis. What doesn't add up is simple. Every alibi presented that night contains a critical flaw, a small crack in its foundation that, under the weight of careful examination, begins to widen. This is where we look at the evidence presented against the clock. Detective Miller, the lead investigator, noted the initial alibi from Mark Jensen, the farm's foreman. Jensen claimed he was home alone, asleep by 10:30 p.m. His wife, away visiting relatives, could not corroborate this. That's a common issue in many cases. Uncorroborated alibis are not evidence of guilt, but they are points of interest. But here's where it gets strange. Jensen's phone records, obtained later, indicated a series of calls made between 11:15 p.m. and 11:45 p.m., a time frame where he claimed to be asleep. These calls were to an unknown number, disconnected shortly after the murder. The record shows a specific pattern of 3 short calls, then silence. Then there's the alibi of Clara Thorne, the victim's estranged niece, who stood to inherit a significant portion of the farm. Thorne stated she was at a solitary cabin, miles away, with no cell service. A witness, a local store owner, placed her in town that evening, but specifically at 9:45 p.m. buying supplies, hours before the estimated time of death. The store owner's statement, however, noted something peculiar. Thorne was observed purchasing a specific brand of specialized cleaning solution, not typically associated with cabin maintenance. This detail matters because the forensic report, still unreleased publicly, later indicated traces of a similar solvent near the scene, despite official statements denying its presence. What about the third individual of interest, Farmer Thomas O'Connell? He maintained he was at a local bar until closing, leaving around 1 a.m. Several regulars confirmed his presence. His alibi appeared solid, almost too solid. Yet, security footage from a gas station 15 miles from the farm captured O'Connell's distinctive pickup truck at 1:45 a.m., driving in the opposite direction from his home. The timestamp doesn't match his stated travel time, nor his proclaimed route. It's a 15-minute discrepancy, a small window, but significant. Why not simply drive straight home? What was the detour for, and what was he doing during that critical gap? The official version leaves this unexplained, and the investigation did not press for clarification. This pattern of small, overlooked inconsistencies in each alibi begins to paint a concerning picture. The unseen visitor. The alibis for the farm owners, the Millers, as we previously examined, were shaky at best, full of convenient holes and contradictions. Yet nothing concrete placed them directly at the scene during the critical window. But the investigation into the Meadowbrook massacre wasn't just about what happened inside the farmhouse. It was also about who might have been circling its lonely perimeter, an unseen visitor. That's where the forensic analysis of a single unusual piece of evidence becomes crucial. Found near the barn was a distinctive hand-carved wooden bird, one not native to the region. It seemed out of place in every regard, a bizarre detail amidst the horror. According to the lead detective's notes, the bird was initially dismissed as a child's toy, perhaps left behind by a previous visitor, an oversight. However, that detail matters because no children had lived at Meadowbrook in over a decade. The Millers had no young relatives visiting that summer, and there were no reports of trespassers in the weeks leading up to the incident. This raises an important question: who placed it there and why? The bird itself was crafted from a rare timber, later identified by a local artisan, a certain Mr. Elias Thorne, as coming from a specific type of South American tree. Thorne, known for his unique wood creations, could not recall making such a bird himself, yet recognized the wood and a particular chisel mark on its base. A mark, he stated, that belonged to a former apprentice. The apprentice, a transient individual named Garrett Stone, had a history of petty theft and a known animosity towards the Millers, according to local police records. Stone had worked seasonally at Meadowbrook 2 years prior, a period ending abruptly after a dispute over wages. This, the evidence suggests, positioned Stone not only with the means to create such an object, but with a potential motive, however minor it might seem in the larger context of a bloodbath. However, Stone had reportedly left the area years ago, vanishing without a digital footprint. What doesn't add up is why he would return, leave such a peculiar calling card, and then disappear once more. The timeline of his supposed disappearance, according to a police report from a neighboring county, places him in another state entirely at the time of the murders. But here's the problem with that report. It was never fully corroborated. Financial discrepancies emerge. The previous chapter left us with the unsettling presence of an unseen visitor at Meadowbrook Farm. Now, let's turn our attention to something equally opaque: the financial records. Here's what the timeline shows on October 12th. Precisely 3 days before the murders, a significant transfer of funds occurred from the farm's operating account. A total of $50,000 moved in a single transaction directly into a private account belonging to Owen Miller, the farm's owner. This detail matters. Owen Miller was known for his meticulous financial management, almost to a fault. His ledgers were always balanced, every expense accounted for. Yet, this particular transfer lacks any clear internal documentation or justification within the farm's extensive financial records, a glaring anomaly that immediately raises questions. What was this $50,000 for? And why was there no paper trail? The official bank statement from Meadowbrook Farm, obtained during the initial investigation, confirms the outgoing transfer. However, Owen Miller's personal bank statements, also reviewed by investigators, show no corresponding deposit on that same date. The funds vanished into a financial black hole. This isn't a small inconsistency. Detectives initially dismissed it as a prepayment for a large cattle purchase or a private investment, but no such purchase or investment ever materialized, at least not in any record tied to Miller's known assets or business dealings. The discrepancy suggests either a deeply hidden transaction, one Miller went to great lengths to conceal, or a forced transfer under duress. The idea of Owen Miller willingly moving such a substantial sum without record, just days before his death, contradicts every aspect of his business persona. He was careful, almost obsessively so, with money. This financial ghost, $50,000 disappearing without a trace, just before the bloodbath on the farm, becomes a crucial, unanswered question in the unfolding case file. What else was hidden within those ledgers? The unaccounted hours. Po sprawdzeniu finansów podziawiła się nowa warstwa problemu, problem braku czasu. Policja z Meadowbrook, opierając się na zeznaniach sąsiadów, oficjalnie ustaliła, że Elizabeth Miller opuściła farmę około 8 rano w dniu morderstwa. Wysiadła do swojego beżowego Chevroleta Tahoe i pojechała na codzienną wizytę u swojego chirurga plastycznego, doktora Martina Greena, u pobliskim miasteczku Fairfax. Zapisy z gabinetu doktora Greena potwierdzili, że obecnoc o 9:30 rano, a rachunek za usługi medyczne datowali na ten dzień rozwaja wielkie wątpliwości odnośnie do jej alibi. Jednak, raporci patologa, dr Emily Chen osakowała czas zgonu Williama Millera na midie 7:08 rano. Ten szczycild ma znaczenie, ponieważ tu obny 2 godzinach Elizabeth miała być keczta na farmie. Koni dodaje spójności tu fakt, że nagranie z monitoringu z pojeździ Bethany i Johna Petersonu, małżeństwa mieszkaczego zaledwie 2 mile od Meadowbrook Farm i znanego z sąsiedzkiej dniekeci do Millero, pokazuje beżowe Tahoe, opuszczacie farmę Millera o 7:15 rano. Pełna godzina i 15 minut przed tym, jak Millerowi rzekomo opuścili posiadłość. Śledztwo nigdy nie eskleiło tych rozbieżności. Dlaczego pani Miller miałaby opuścić farmę Siziening? Nie spodala w zeznaniach i czego tu nagranie nie udziałnia. A new witness appears. The unaccounted hours were critical. They created a window, a gap in the official timeline that investigators struggled to fill. Now, into that messy timeline, a new piece of information emerges. A witness. Someone who wasn't initially present in any police report. This is where it gets strange, because their account not only contradicts previous statements but also reveals a specific detail about Meadowbrook Farm no one else mentioned. According to new findings from the evidence log's independent review of archived court documents, specifically an overlooked deposition filed months after the initial investigation, a local handyman, Mark Jenkins, claimed he saw a vehicle near the farm. Jenkins, who maintained several properties in the area, stated he was heading home around 11:30 p.m. on the night of the murders. He described a dark, older model pickup truck parked in a rarely used access road leading to the back fields of Meadowbrook. The initial police questionnaires made no mention of Jenkins. His statement only surfaced during the civil lawsuit filed by the victim's family, seeking answers the criminal investigation failed to provide. Jenkins, under oath, explained he didn't come forward sooner because he didn't think it was important. He saw vehicles near farms all the time. But the specific detail he provided changes everything. He claims the truck had a distinctive, almost amateur repair on the driver's side taillight, a strip of silver duct tape holding a cracked red plastic cover. This detail matters. Why? Because no such vehicle was ever noted in the official police canvass of the area. No dark pickup with a duct-taped taillight was mentioned by any other witness, nor did it appear in any compiled list of vehicles of interest. The timeline shows Jenkins placed this truck at a crucial time, well after the first calls about the fire, but before the property was fully cordoned off. It suggests someone was either arriving late or leaving unnoticed, just as chaos enveloped the farm. What doesn't add up is why this description, so specific, so potentially valuable, was not immediately flagged in the early stages of the investigation. The official version leaves this unexplained, as if Jenkins' testimony simply fell through the cracks. The hidden connection. The new witness, a former associate of Marcus Thorne, provided the first real crack in the official narrative. Their testimony, given anonymously to preserve their safety, pointed to a financial motive, something the initial investigation largely dismissed. Let's look at the evidence presented. This associate, identified in court documents as Witness A, claimed Thorne was deeply involved in a series of land deals surrounding Meadowbrook Farm. Deals that, according to Witness A, were far from legitimate. They described a predatory scheme to acquire surrounding properties at undervalued rates, all tied to a planned but unannounced highway expansion project. This is the part that raises questions because the official record shows Thorne as a struggling farmer, not a land speculator. Witness a detailed meetings, phone calls, and even specific dates when these deals were discussed, placing Thorne at the center of a much larger, darker financial web. For instance, they recalled a heated argument between Thorne and a representative from a local development firm, just weeks before the massacre. This argument, according to witness A, was about a disputed parcel, a small piece of land near the farm that could significantly impact the highway's route. This detail matters. The official police report contains no mention of these land deals, nor any investigation into Thorne's financial activities beyond the farm's operating costs. Why were these potential connections overlooked? The police focused solely on the internal dynamics of the farm, building a narrative around familial tensions and perceived isolation. But witness A's statement suggests that powerful external forces were at play. The testimony introduced a new layer of complexity, hinting that the motive might not have been personal rage or a sudden breakdown, but something far colder and more calculated: profit. It forced a reevaluation of everything that came before: the timeline, the victims' lives, and Thorne's meticulously crafted public image. It all began to shift under the weight of this hidden connection. Now, here's where it gets strange. Following witness A's statement, we find a curious entry in a county land registry, a recent unrecorded transfer of the disputed parcel. The owner? A shell corporation tied to the same development firm witness A mentioned. This transfer occurred just days after the massacre. Coincidence? Or the final piece falling into place for someone else's gain? This small detail changes everything. The overlooked detail. The previous chapter examined the hidden connection between the financial movements and the farm, a connection that, on its surface, seemed almost too subtle to matter. But that's where it gets strange. Because while the official investigation focused on the obvious, the brutality, the isolated location, it fundamentally overlooked one critical piece of evidence, a detail that, once examined, changes the entire narrative. What they said happened, and what the evidence silently screams, are two different things. Let's go back to the autopsy reports, specifically the initial findings from Dr. Evelyn Reed. She noted, and this was recorded in Exhibit C14, a series of microfractures in the victim's hands and forearms. These weren't defensive wounds from a struggle. They were subtle, consistent with repetitive, forceful impact. The original report dismissed them as incidental, wear and tear perhaps from farm work. A convenient explanation, but one that falls apart under scrutiny. Because what these microfractures suggest is not incidental wear. They suggest a specific type of occupational strain. We're talking about the kind of stress injuries you'd see from someone using, or resisting the use of, heavy machinery. Farm equipment, for instance, but not just any equipment. The kind that involves a violent, almost percussive movement. A detail matters here. The angle and depth of these fractures indicated a particular twisting force, combined with blunt impact. And here's where Silas's earlier observation comes back into play: the odd placement of the vintage seed drill. Remember that piece of equipment? It was found partially disassembled, its manual nowhere to be found, and its hydraulic lines disconnected. The official theory claimed the perpetrator might have attempted to use it, perhaps as a distraction, but the microfractures suggest something far more direct. What if the seed drill wasn't a distraction, but the very instrument of the attack, or at least intimately involved? The witness statement from Ilara Vance, that young activist from the Hands for Heritage group, mentioned seeing an old, heavy-duty chain with a distinctive hook lying near the entrance to the main barn just days before the incident. This was dismissed as irrelevant, a piece of farm detritus. But let's compare that to the strange grooves found on the victims, grooves that forensic analysis couldn't definitively link to any standard weapon. What isn't adding up is the persistence of these small, almost invisible details: the microfractures, the specific chain, the seed drill, all pointing to a mechanical involvement. A forced narrative was constructed around a simple, brutal event. The evidence suggests a far more complex and, frankly, disturbing scenario. The official version leaves this unexplained. The final reconstruction. After all the evidence, all the timelines, and every contradicting statement, we return to Meadowbrook Farm. Not to the scene of the crime as it was found, but as it was meticulously reconstructed piece by painful piece. We've meticulously cataloged the gaps, the inconsistencies, what was said versus what the paper trail revealed. Now, we must put it all together. What does this final, composite picture truly show us? The official report states a random act of violence, an intruder, a struggle, a brutal outcome. But let's look at the evidence once more. The broken window, initially cited as the point of entry, consistent with forced entry, that detail matters. Yet, Forensic analysis confirmed glass fragments were spread outward from the interior. This suggests the window was not smashed to gain entry, but broken from within, perhaps in a desperate attempt to escape or to stage a scene after the fact. That's where it gets strange. Then there's the matter of the lock, the deadbolt on the farmhouse door. Records from the initial investigation confirm it was found in the locked position from the inside. If an intruder forced entry through that window, why would they then lock the deadbolt behind them on their way out? And if they fled through the window, why was it broken outward? The timeline doesn't add up. Now let's consider the missing firearm, the .38 caliber revolver. Official accounts declared it was stolen by the perpetrators. However, testimony from farmer John Miller's neighbor, Martha Davis, indicates she saw John cleaning that very weapon just 2 days before the incident. She described him as meticulous, almost ritualistic, about firearm maintenance. It raises an important question. Would such a man, so careful with his possessions, leave his primary defense weapon unsecured for a random intruder to simply take? The paper trail tells a different story. No signs of a struggle in the master bedroom, where the revolver was kept. No forced entry to the gun cabinet. It just wasn't there. We are left with a final, chilling reconstruction, a scenario where the violence was not random but deeply personal. Where the official narrative of an external threat crumbles under the weight of internal inconsistencies. The outward breaking glass, the internally locked deadbolt, the undisturbed gun cabinet, these weren't overlooked details, they were key elements pointing away from the easy conclusion. The evidence suggests a far more complex truth, one that points to an inside job, a tragedy orchestrated by someone with access, knowledge, and a motive hidden in plain sight. What doesn't add up is why the original investigation stopped short of this logical conclusion, choosing instead to close the case with convenient answers. Why was the internal logic of the scene ignored? The answer remains elusive. Case closed, for now. Stay with the evidence log as we continue to unlock the truth, one inconsistency at a time. Do you have a case that needs a second look? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into overlooked evidence.